Thanks for having me. Can you hear me over here? Okay. Um, so the title of the talk was Video Artist or something like this. But I think it is, I mean, video, I put this in here because this is in the collection here at the Crystal Bridges. And I mean, artists, Nam was supposed to be, is known as the first artist to dive into video art because he had the Sony played back video system that was just put on the market by Sony. And he was caught in a traffic jam in New York City, and the Pope was coming by, and he stuck the camera out the window and filmed this activity happening and then showed it that evening at this little cafe called the Go-Go or something like this in New York. But I mean, artists have been dipping into video and film for probably since the beginning of film. I think people have been messing with the moving image. And you know, I started off as a sculptor. I went to graduate school for sculpture and still in love with interacting with artwork in that way, where you walk up to it and something happens when you versus seeing something on your telephone or on the computer. I think there's something amazing that happens that I still believe in, that with sculpture or painting, that I'm still moved by that gesture. But I thought I would, talk about tonight how I made the move from video or film from sculpture into film and video. And because I didn't, for about 10 years I was strictly doing sculpture and installation-based work. And I thought maybe I'd start off with just showing some of the things that moved me into sculpture, but then also moved me into using video and film in my practice. Well-known Duchamp piece. These were books left in my undergrad. This is pre-internet, so there was a couple books that had a big influence on me. And one was this futurist book that had, like, Duchamp had Baccioni, the development of bottle in space, and all these kind of objects, sculptural objects that had this suggested movement. And I fell in love with that suggested movement, especially this one. This is by Giacometti, and it's called Suspended Ball. And suggested movement, it would be you would move that ball back and forth. There was a crescent-shaped cutout of the ball, and so it had this a little sort of an erotic feel to it, but it was the suggested movement that you would make it move without it actually moving like a kinetic piece of sculpture. I was also looking at, this is back in graduate school, where I'd go to the Rare Book Library and I'd find all these really amazing German books on early agricultural technology, and just fell in love with these machines that I had no idea what these things did, but they were doing something. And so that was my, this is what my work looked like for probably about 10 years, investigating the space in a way that I would go into a museum or a gallery and with just a load of material, and I would just start building. And there were no drawings made. It was a little impulsive. I knew what the architectural space that I was working in, and I knew what materials I had, and would build one thing. In this case, I started with the wheel in the back, and then it hooked up to something else, So this whole space became this sort of odd workshop with materials, raw materials like cotton and flour and salt and soap and things like this. But everything had a suggested movement. It either looked like, as you came into the gallery or the museum, that you just interrupted something and something had stopped in process. So there was already this suggested movement and interaction with the space and you within the space. Sometimes material was left in the space, like it was still either being in the process of being built or repaired. So it was at this time, this was a piece where I was invited to come in and build on site, which was great. And had about a month to build. And it's where I met a filmmaker that was working at the museum at the time. And we started talking, and I said I've wanted to like look into what would it be like to actually activate these things in a film or a video. And so he said, tell you what, why don't you set up a situation and I'll bring in a crew and we'll film it and see what happens. And that really started my relationship with the moving image and incorporating video and film into my work. And so this was the first one, was called Gastro Colony, and so I made this contraption, this machine. I installed it in a turn-of-the-century barn in Wisconsin, and then hooked myself up to this machine and started operating it. And I had no idea what it meant to be involved with like a film kind of production. And I thought they would just say, I would say roll them or action, and I would do my thing. But it was like, it was 4 hours before we even got one piece of film rolled. It was like we were lighting one side, and so it was a pretty abstract way to look at my process, because the way I work, like with either heavy rotation or some of these other films that I'll build, and I'll start with a small seed, and it'll sort of grow like a garden, and then I'll keep rehearsing it in my head, and then when it comes time to shoot, it's just acting it out then. And so it was in this case, it was pretty abstract, because we shot everything, action that was happening on this side, and then all the action on this side. And the way my work works, like the heavy rotation piece, you follow this narrative, or this something's like running through. It's a process where it's like it starts here, and you follow either a character or a liquid or a material, and sort of like a production line where you can see these moments, but you never see maybe the entire thing in its entirety. And so I think I've learned since then that how to work with that medium, but I think I've sort of come in full circle, where heavy rotation was that process of like unedited version of this action that took place, moving from room to room to room. I thought I'd maybe talk about, because some of them, they might look storyboarded out, but it's like there's things that will influence me before I start working on these different projects. And this one, I was thinking about. I knew about shotgun houses for a long time. I'm in the north, and we don't have any shotgun houses. You probably have them down here in the southern part of the United States, in New Orleans. And so I'd heard about them as a kid, because I was a big Elvis and Fats Domino fan, and I'd always heard that these characters grew up in shotgun houses, and I always loved the idea of like a shotgun house. And so looking into what that meant, like what is a shotgun house, because it was such a active word for architecture, that they call it shotgun houses. You can shoot a shotgun from the front door out the back door, because all the rooms and doors are aligned in the same direction. So I took that and found this one to become the model for this piece called Deep North. And like that idea of this action of a shot, like this energy going from the front door out the back door. So I decided to rebuild the shotgun house to scale. It's probably 15 feet by about 45 feet, and built it in my backyard in St. Paul. And if you know, Minnesota gets extremely cold in the wintertime, and so took advantage of the weather, and in about mid-January, sprayed hundreds of gallons of water over a couple weeks inside and outside the house to make this ice-encrusted environment. One of the, I don't know if I set goals for the things that I do, but in this case, I was thinking about that idea of the shotgun, and that's such a kind of a violent way of looking at architecture, or that action of going from the front door out the back door. But also it was coming off a project that was kind of dark in subject matter, and wanted to do something that was just purely really beautiful, and make a really beautiful interior space in this house. And also, when things are frozen, they're dead, or they don't move, but at the same time, this thing was so the juxtaposition of this ice house that had this machine. It's a water wheel in the center of the house, and then this absurd action that these three characters were doing, where ice tubes were coming in from the front of the house, and they weren't touching them or picking them up. You could just pick it up and bring it to the back of the house, but it's just this absurd sort of mechanical way of doing something that's very simple, what is it called? Conveyor belt, like one of these factories. And the characters in there are doing these actions. So, you know, as I was looking at it, it's a lot like heavy rotation, where you see this character in a space, in a very specific space. In that case, it's a studio. This one, it's a kind of surreal iced house. And you see these people doing these things almost to no end. You don't know what they're doing, but they're doing it just because this is what they do. And they're flat affect. They're not complaining. They're doing what they do. And so I'm just we'll watch maybe like a couple minutes of this one. This is called Deep North. Yeah. That's a good question. I mean, I think it's a lot like it probably has a lot to do with the way I look at like the installations where you walk in and it's like, it looks like you've walked in the middle of something being produced. And when you leave that maybe it's going to kick back in after you go. I think in terms of the fire one, that was, I don't know how I view that one yet. I don't know if that's more documentation of an event that took place. And this one, it just, it's about a 7-minute, 8-minute piece, maybe, and you go back in the house and you see the characters doing more of the same. And there's a moment that one of the characters in the back of the room, she's going around the circle, and there's just a really slight moment of like maybe realization, or she looks at the camera and realizes the gravity of the situation, and then just keeps going. And then that's what it ends. It's sort of like, then it's the final shot is the shotgun blast. There's a shot it's a tracking shot that runs from the front door all the way across the house and out the back door. So it ends leaving again. So. That's a good question. The characters I work with, these people that I work with, they come in the day before the shoot, and we talk about what they're to do, their jobs in the house, and I ask them not to. There's no expression. It's not about like act. It's like more about doing the motions of running the machines. So. No, but it's the longest shot. It was on a cart, like a motorized cart. So it's a sort of, you get this view of the whole entirety of the house from front to back. I thought I'd talk about one project that I did with this film called Crush Collision. And maybe this one is a little more complex, but I think it's good. Maybe it's interesting to hear how one of these things come together. And I'll show this one in its entirety. It's about 10 minutes long or something. But the way I started with this one, it's typical of like that exhibition that I showed you with starting with the wheel, and then one thing follows another. And I was at the studio one night, and I called my wife at home, and I said, "Can you measure the piano?" Because I wanted to make a piano. And so she measured everything, and from those measurements that night, I made a piano, like a upright, and you'll see it in the film. And I knew I wanted to work with music on this next piece, and so I was at the library looking up different musicians that I had been interested in, like Fats Waller and Fats Domino, and Scott Joplin came up, and I started doing some research about Scott Joplin, because it's somebody that I really loved as a kid, and loved his blend of, it's a blend of like European and American jazz to make this thing called ragtime. So it's like this, it's that, if you know The Entertainer, which is probably the most famous piece. And I like that blend of these two different music genres. And so started to look into Scott Joplin, and then this thing came up, and it was The Great Crush Collision by Scott Joplin. And started to look into what this Crush Collision was, because it was such a curious title for a piece. And after researching, it was back in 1895, this railroad entrepreneur, and it was close to Waco, Texas, and I've done some projects based on Waco, but this railroad entrepreneur wanted to set up a situation, sort of like a reality TV scene, where he said he's going to take two locomotives and put them in motion and smash them together, and invited everybody to get on his trains to come out there to watch this event. so tons and tons of people show up for this event. And it was supposedly that Scott Joplin was at this event in Crush, Texas, back in the 1890s. And I just thought it was very interesting that a black man from Texas was watching this event unfold, a train coming from the north and south and just smashing to bits. So the story ends a little bit, quite a bit tragic, because the trains crash, and what they didn't take into account that there was boilers involved with these old locomotives, and when they hit, they just exploded like a bomb, and it sent shrapnel, killing the viewers, and the photographer got his eye knocked out by a bolt or something like that. But I just, I'd been working with this idea of like collisions or conversations between two things, and I see Scott Joplin as that character too, of like taking these two things, these two different kind of music, the European and this American jazz, and smashing them together. So I had the piano, and I put it on rockers, and I wanted you to be able to play the piano in a different way, and so it rocked back and forth versus like, so you played it more like a rhythmic instrument. And then I needed something to put the piano into, and so I decided to build a house, which was this one. So I decided to build the house and float it on this lake in northern Wisconsin, and put the piano on the top floor, and I wanted a family on the bottom floor around the table. And so there was this record that I've loved for many, many years, that I've had for a long time, by Mahalia Jackson, who, toured around with Martin Luther King during the Civil Rights Movement. But I've always loved this record cover just because it looks like it could be a 16 millimeter just rolling continuously of this family around the table praying in front of a very simple meal. So I used to play in a country gospel band for many years. And within that, I used to book all these talents from in town for this little radio show that we had. And there was this family called the Spiritual Knights that I was friends with, and used to book them into different things. And asked them, and I told them about this project, and I said, would you be interested in being involved in this project? And so they said, yes, we understand what you're trying to do. We understand about collisions. So they were into it. So got them up on the lake in the house. And then on the top floor, I needed a piano player, and so I invited a guy that I'd collaborated with for some time. His name was Grant Hart, who used to play in this punk band called Husker Du. It was a Minneapolis band. And so he was the rhythm behind the piano. I got the footage back, and then a couple months later, Katrina hit. And I had this family on a house in the middle of the water, and it felt trite, and it felt too close to reality. These things happen when you do, and you start connecting them to real life events. So I dropped the project for a while. And then I found myself at the Pantages Theater seeing another band that I liked was the Replacements, or Paul Westerberg. And he had this drummer named Michael Bland, who played with Prince in the New Power Generation. And he came out and he was just banging on these drums, and I just thought, this is a guy to get into the production, to get back into this thing. So I talked to Michael. He was game for it. He liked the idea. And then hooked up with Grant again to get him into the first end of the portion of the video, because it takes place in this kind of underground space. We'll watch the video. Maybe it's better just to watch it. And then this very light floating on the water space. But we'll watch, and then if there's questions, or I could say some more things. So it's called Crush Collision.
this world too much for me. I can't take it, I can't take the pain and sorrow. Can't take the pain and sorrow down here by myself. And I'm leaving, I know we are, on that old ship of Zion. Ship of Zion, woo-hoo. I'm gonna get on board and go to heaven when I die, 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 die. This world, oh Lord, too much for me, too much for me. I can't take it, I can't take the pain and sorrow. Can't take the pain and sorrow down here by myself. And I'm leaving, I know we are, on that old ship of Zion. Ship of Zion, woo-hoo. I'm gonna get on board and go to heaven when I die, 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 die. And my Father,
I know He will.
whoa, He's gonna be
Yes,
there
my
too.
Father's gonna be there too.
Yes, He
Oh,
will.
yeah.
When we join
I know
hands
we are.
on that old ship of Zion, ship of Zion, woo-hoo. I'm gonna get on board and go to heaven when I die, 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 die. Wanna ride, wanna ride, wanna ride, old ship of Zion. Wanna ride, old ship of Zion. Wanna ride, wanna ride, wanna ride, wanna ride, old ship of Zion. Oh, ship of Zion.
Oh, ship of Zion.
Oh, ship of Zion.
Wanna ride. Oh, ship of Zion.
Oh, ship of Zion. Oh, ship of Zion. Oh, ship of Zion.
I was going to show, I was going to end up tonight talking about heavy rotation and how I got to heavy rotation. I was going to show you some videos. Maybe I can just talk about these things versus showing what I was looking at the time when heavy rotation came about. And I is after a period. I typically got my studio. I work and I make things. Many of the things never make it out of the studio. They make it into the 20-yard dumpster. And so the way I process things, it's just like I have to build it to see it. And so I'll build and things don't work out. So then I start again. And this time I did a radical cleanup where I threw everything away and ended up with just a completely blank white studio. And I wanted to start over and start new Now I know that it's impossible to do that because you always bring something through the door with you, which is good, you know. And as I look at heavy rotation, there's so many things in why I wanted to show all of Crush Collision, because there's so many connections between Crush Collision and heavy rotation, meaning like things going through floors and being in multiple spaces at the same time by looking up through here, up at Grant through the second floor and then down through the water. So there's always been these layers in my work, and I've been interested in that these either psychological spaces or physical spaces that we inhabit and that we move in and through. And so I'm careful what I bring back into my studio because I'm easily influenced by whatever I see inside my studio. And so books influence me, things that are up or things that I've had around too long or materials and so everything made its way out. And the first thing that made it back in, one was a record player, because I like to play records in the studio. And definitely, I was trying to make images using the aid of the record player, because I'm not within my practice. There's nothing expressive in my practice that does this, but I'm interested in my hand, like doing these kind of marks. It's always been this removal, like in Deep North, of the removal of touching the actual thing to get it from one place to another. So I was trying to hook up pens to the record player and all these different kind of contraptions to make like an image using the record player as the tool. And it was at the same time I was reading interviews by Bruce Nauman, who I really love. He's an artist started out in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Today, very influential. But I was reading this book that's, and I forget the name, it's called Please Eat My Words or something like this. And reading about his early on when he was in his studio and he had nothing to work with in his studio but him and his body. And so he started doing these actions in the studio and would turn the camera on, and I would assume it was 16 millimeter or something because his dealer would give them cameras to work with. And so one of the videos is called Walking in Exaggerated Movement. And he taped off a square on the floor, and you see Bruce walking in this very exaggerated moment in the studio. And he does it for about 20 minutes, and nothing happened but him walking in his studio. And but I love that idea of artists working with those ideas of the artist in the studio goes back years and hundreds of years. You've seen paintings of the artist in his studio, or self-portraits, or inside the studio space. And so was intrigued by Bruce, looking at him in his studio. And as I look back at like the earlier work, I think a lot of those pieces were about like the production of something happening within the space, like those old machines. It's like, I think I was just replicating what I do normally in the studio, especially in heavy rotation, where it was a direct look at an artist working in their studio. There was also this short film that I saw at the Met of Richard Serra, who also liked quite a bit. But it was him and Philip Glass, and the camera was set above them, and a bunch of metal shards are put on the ground. And the whole video is them like cleaning these things up to get down to the bare wood floor. And saw some connection just because you watch this process and you want to see everything completely get cleaned up, and you watch this process go for about 5 minutes. Also, Trisha Donnelly was a big influence. She's a postmodern choreographed dancer, and has done things at the Walker Art Center where she'll use her body within the drawings, and she'll lay out a huge piece of paper or canvas on the floor. And she did one of these at the Walker in 2008, where she's got drawing materials, and she's laying on the floor, and she's like doing like this and making just these really, really amazing, beautiful documentations of a drawing or of a dance versus like what we typically what we see as actions happening up on the stage. This is like looking down at her going through the motions, and you get this patina or this documentation of her actions on that surface. And so it was these things that I was thinking about. And then started to, that was just a studio shot about the time of heavy rotation. I thought I'd throw that in there. But I started making, I wanted to make a drawing using a mechanical way of, as you can tell, circles are very important in my work. And it's like, you know, with the guy spinning around or the water wheels and all this stuff. So I wanted to make a drawing using a mechanical way of like removing my hand one step from that process. And so I had vellum in my studio, which I really love drawing on because it takes lead and graphite really nicely on the surface. So I had these pieces of vellum, and I took a piece of wood, and I put the flat piece of wood on the surface, and I nailed it to the center, and then sprinkled graphite on there because I had buckets of graphite because I would use it in the deep north thing to lubricate the wheel so it wouldn't squeak so much. And so started sprinkling the graphite onto the surface and then taking the stick and moving it around. It was, at the beginning, I felt like it was too easy. It's like some of these times in your studio where you go, this can't be the thing. This is too easy or it's too much fun. And it's like not, so I dropped it and I tried to make some other thing. And then I went back to it and I kept going back to it and shying away from maybe pleasure in the studio. Because sometimes you think that this can't be, it's like it's too easy of a action. Maybe like Pollock when he's doing this thing, it's like, but you keep doing it and you keep doing it. And I wanted to perfect it. And so for about almost, which I typically don't do, I move fast through ideas, but this one I wanted to sort of perfect this process and make a really beautiful image of this documentation of an action that I did. And they take about maybe 5 minutes total to make. So I learned about painting mediums, and I got Gamsol and Galkalide, this other stuff, to bind the graphite to the surface. So the surface was liquefied, and then the drawing was made. And so I made about maybe 100 or so of these until I got maybe 12 really what I thought were really beautiful representations of what I wanted to get. So as I was doing this, I started thinking about what this looked like from above. So I put a camera above me and found that action very interesting. And it probably reminded me of a lot like that crush collision of that thing rolling around or wheels rolling around. So again, like the piano, then decided to build this multi-level studio space that I would occupy and run the camera and sort of guide you through the lens of the camera through this sort of psychological or impossible space. And since you've all seen it, I don't think I need to show this one, right? Uh-huh. The question of how it's shown, or how, or do I think about the viewer? Yeah. I mean, I'm conscious about like I mean, there's part of me where it's like like Crush Collision was edited down. It was originally like almost 35 minutes long because I loved seeing the process of like everything. I wanted like, because I made all these like details and I wanted every pin to be pulled out and every part of the process documented. And then I think after watching it, it's like, is it necessary to see all this, or can I sort of fast forward using cinematic tricks, right? By editing tricks. Heavy rotation, I didn't want to do it. I wanted to go feel like it was one long motion, you know? But the other ones, editing, it's like cinematic tricks where you can like transport you from underground to a lake, a house on a lake. But I do think about like the rhythm of like how long people are going to stay, and I think it's like that. I think with heavy rotation, there's enough that you're watching, and it's might be a little odd. You see a guy doing something, all of a sudden the floor drops out, and then he goes down, and then maybe it starts up again, and I mean, I've heard the comments like, is this going to be a Sisyphus kind of thing where it's like it's going room and from room to room to room, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to end somehow, and so, but I think about, I'm hoping that, you know, people will stick it out. It's hard, you know. You go to a museum and you look on the wall and it's like 26 minutes, and it's like, I'm going to be here an hour. Do I want to spend 26 minutes watching a video? And, I mean, I love the context of a group show, and I love how you, especially with this one where it's like it is this artist in his studio working, doing something, and then you walk out and then you see, you know, and sometimes it feels like the work just magically appears somehow in the space. And I don't know. I love when things bleed over and cross over within a group exhibition, even with audio. I mean, I love when there's like it's activated that way. But it is different. You know, these have been shown in like festivals where it is like a sit-down thing, and it comes up and you watch it, and it's very much like a movie experience versus like I watched it today before we came up here, and just to see people's reaction and how they entered into the piece, because some you could tell, like some would walk in when everything was going up to the ceiling, and I think they stuck around because they wanted to know how did this come to be for everything to be flipped upside down. And I think those people I saw watched it through to the end. Some walked in, they saw just a dude in the studio and walked out. And so, I don't know, maybe again it's like walking into an exhibition, the early work of mine where it's like it looks like something was in progress before you even got there. And I like that. I like that interaction with work. I think I'm always looking for the door to the left, or the door, because you know, if you look, Deep North is a good example. It's like it is that. It's like if you think about like labor and human labor and machines, and it's like a conveyor belt line. What are these things called? Production line or whatever, right? It's like it's assembly line, that's what it is, you know? I mean, you've got this community of people working on an assembly line. This person has no idea. They know they're doing something together, collectively, to make something, but this person is not interacting with this person. So there's something about like that human-machine relationship that I've always been interested in. But I think what I'm always looking for that left turn to get out of, like, because the thing at the end of the line, whatever it's being produced, is not. It's the goal, but for the people doing the work, it's like it doesn't mean anything to them. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. And I think with heavy rotation, I finally found like a left door or a door out by turning the entire thing upside down. And it wasn't just assembly line. At first it was like you're going through and it's going to happen again. And then it happens again. And then you think it's going to happen again, and then finally it goes that way.